name is Simone Lovera. I'm director of the Global Forest Coalition. I hope everybody can hear me well. I welcome all of you to this first of a new series of regional webinars on the problems, the impacts of industrial and other forms of large-scale livestock production on people, on the environment. And this series particularly focuses on the actors and the incentives that are fueling unsustainable livestock farming, and especially industrial livestock farming. I'm replacing here Isis Alvarez, the coordinator of our program on unsustainable livestock farming, who sadly wasn't able to attend this webinar at the very last moment. This webinar is part of a series of webinars we actually started already last year, a series of dialogues first on trying to mobilize people to look at the impacts of unsustainable livestock farming on the planet, which is really one of the biggest causes of climate change. It's probably one of the most rapidly growing causes of greenhouse gas emissions. Already 14.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions are related to large-scale industrial livestock farming. And it is expected that this will grow disproportionately if current trends in the expansion of meat and dairy, industrial meat and dairy production are not halted. And the impacts can very much be felt in the country where I'm based, in Paraguay, where 4/5 of all the agricultural land has been taken over for large-scale genetically modified soy production and large-scale beef production, with devastating impacts on especially indigenous peoples, local communities, peasants, and women. Both because of the deforestation and, for example, pollution like effects like pesticides used in the genetically modified soy plantations. And it's often overlooked that a very large part of this production is actually destined for Asia. Of course, Asia is the place where, at this moment, 59.5% of the entire world population is living. And if you look, for example, at the impacts of deforestation in Brazil and the causes behind it, which are very much beef and soy production as well, it is typifying to see that from the 10 biggest importers of Brazilian beef, 7 countries are in Asia, and from the 10 biggest importers of Brazilian soy, 6 countries are in Asia. So Asia is actually a really important player in this whole chain of the industrial livestock industry, if only due to its very sheer size. So I'm very happy that we will start this series of webinars now with a focus on Asia, on the agro-industrial sector, on meat and dairy consumption in Asia. We have a range of very diverse panelists for this webinar. First of all, we have Dr. Jan Baxter, who is a program officer in the Overseas Investment, Trade and Environment Program at the Global Environment Institute in China. She's responsible for a transnational project that promotes zero deforestation commitments from public and private stakeholders involved in the industry of agribusiness between Latin America and China. She has a PhD from King's College in London and has worked in China, the UK, and Japan. I'm also very happy that we have on the panel Bola Bhattarai and Roshan Shikambanyar. Bola Bhattarai is an activist working in the natural resources sector in Nepal since 25 years. He's associated with the National Forum for Advocacy Nepal, NAFAN, one of our member groups in the capacity of policy experts. And Roshan Shikambanyar is project coordinator of NAFAN, being an environmentalist by profession. They're both working on indigenous rights over natural resources and climate justice in Nepal. Next, we will have Annette Daniel. I'm very happy she could join the panel as well. She's a researcher with extensive experience in development and policy work on issues of agriculture, biodiversity, biosafety, climate change, and environmental governance in Southeast Asia, currently working with the ECC group, one of our close allies in many campaigns. And last, but certainly not least, we'll have Afsar Jaffrey, who has worked for 20 years in agriculture and food policy. And he's closely linked with farmers groups in India and throughout the region, and has a master's in philosophy, international law from the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So with that, I would like to start with inviting Dr. Jan Baxter for her presentation. Just to remind panelists and attendees that we will have a short opportunity for questions and answers and comments, brief comments after each presentation. For the attendees, you're kindly requested to put your questions in the question and answer section, which you will find on the bottom of your screen, the Q&A button. You are also very welcome to contribute to the discussion by chat. You will see the chat button. And last, I hope that everybody is fine with the fact that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections to that, please let us know. So with that, Dr. Jan Baxter, I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Simone. And can we share the presentation, the PowerPoint that I've prepared?
Yes, are you able to share it, or Milena, can you share it?
Yes, I will start sharing now.
I should actually introduce me. So behind the other Global Forest Coalition button, there's Milena Bernal, our new colleague from the Livestock program, who's helping with the logistics of the webinar.
1 second, please.
So firstly, I will just say thank you for inviting me to this presentation platform. And my topic is about sustainability concerns in China, Latin American agribusiness from a demand side perspective.
Now, can you see the screen?
Yes, and yes, it's perfect, yes. So my name's Tian, nice to meet you, everybody. Next slide, please. Yeah. So China increasingly relies on South American countries to provide agricultural commodities such as beef, leather, and soy. So let's take the China-Brazil soy trade as an example. Brazil and China are very important to each other in terms of soy business. And for Brazil, China bought 55% of Brazil's total soybean production in 2018. And this amount of soybean is also very essential for China's market, as Brazilian soybeans accounted for 53% of imported soybeans landed in China. America took up 30% and Argentina accounted for 7%. Let's now examine this interdependence based on a timeline, and I divided into two parts, before 2018 and even after 2018, because I think the trade dispute between China and the US in 2018 affected the data and made China rely on Brazil even more. So before 2018, for a decade till 2017, Brazilian soybeans for supplying the international market had increased by 2.2 times, and its provision to China paralleled to this trend and increased by 2.5 times. In 2017, China bought 50 to 53 million tons of soybeans from Brazil, depending on different data sources. In 2018, China bought 66 million tons of soybeans from Brazil, which is about 20% increase from 2017. And in China's market in 2018, Brazilian soybeans accounted for 73% of imported soybean landed in China. American took up 8 to 19% based on different data sources. Brazilian soybeans are supplied through 79 companies totally into China, and the top 4 multinational grain enterprises hold a 47% market share, and the state-owned enterprise at COFCO is quickly expanding its market share. And they deliver Brazilian soybeans into 15 provinces in China. And in terms of their import value, the value imported for 3 provinces accounted for 50% of the national total import value, and they are Shandong, Jiangsu, and Beijing. Next slide, please. So the deepened interdependence reliance on imported soybeans is, I think, largely affected by China's policy. So here I will talk about China's policy supporting the import of foreign agricultural produce. China was the biggest soybean producer in the 1950s. As soon as it became a net importer in 1996, due to the considerable internal demand. And this changed the role of China from being a competitor in this market against the US to becoming one of its clients. The government in Beijing therefore enacted an importation barrier policy that controlled the import of processed soybeans from the US in 1997. However, this instrument was abandoned in 2001 as a result of the joining the WTO. And there are 4 policies with the accession of WTO, and the reducing importation tax is one of them. Joining the WTO is therefore facilitate the sectoral reform in China, and China relied more on imported soybeans and reduced the pressure for domestic yield, as we could see from this figure. Diversified food resources protect the domestic natural environment and improve food security. Also, transnational grain enterprises started to monopolize China's soybean market. Since 2001, China has been gradually losing its internal management capacity, such as pricing, as international food suppliers set up the price, which further affected the price of Chinese processed soybean products, such as soy cake and soy meals. Between 2002 and 2008, the government of China launched a subsidies policy to support the cultivation of quality beans in China, i.e. the percentage of protein, fat, and in certain areas in China, in the northeast of China, which has nutritious land. To further increase the import of soybeans, the Chinese government further reduced the importation tax in 2008. They also purchased those quality soybeans from the Chinese farmers with higher and higher price, and encouraged companies to do so in order to protect quality beans, smallholders' right, and food diversification and food security. Next slide, please. From 2014 to 2017, the government stopped buying soybeans from farmers. Instead, it provided price subsidies for farmers if they didn't get expected sales. So farmers could even get more income if they could sell them at a higher price. And this will stimulate the capacity building of farmers and their willingness to plant beans. To further improve the flexibility of the domestic market, the government has offered more and more subsidies for other chain members, such as the manufacturers, investors, and the transportation sector. China has therefore improved its manufacturing capacity, financial mechanisms, and the transport capability. National policy also covers agricultural technology, pilot programs for growing quality beans, and increased subsidies for farmers during the trade war period. So we can look at the 13th five-year development plan. I think it implies 5 principles. In large arable land for soybeans in 8 provinces and also Russia and Canada, China's self-supply capacity is recovered back to 2013 level, reached over 14% of the market share in 2018. It aims to increase by actual 1% in 2020 and actual 1% by 2022. And for the nutritional value of soybeans grown in China, China also set up a specific target for that. It's also aimed to green the sector and the change in pig feed materials. Next slide, please. So China's agriculture policy promotes the import of foreign beans. But the problem, as we all know, is that there are sustainability concerns in this inter-regional trade relationship, such as deforestation, the risk of habitat loss, climate change, biodiversity risk, and the impact of China's transportation project as part of the Belt and Road initiatives worth $1.2 billion carried out in Brazil could also be quite negative in terms of those sustainable factors. So this highlights that the China's sectoral reform hasn't paid that much attention to the environmental and the social problems attached to its imported agricultural produce. Next slide, please. On the other hand, I want to say there are some good leading examples given by some important actors in China, such as the COFCO conglomerate. The COFCO International has adopted a supplier code of conduct and a sustainable soy sourcing policy. It has also joined several important sustainable platforms and recently received a $2.1 billion sustainability loan. And through our conversation with COFCO headquartered in Beijing, we understand that the COFCO Beijing office is going to learn from its international branches and is going to establish its corporate sustainability framework and is willing to listen to third-party opinions for establishing this framework. The China Meat Association has also made its declaration in 2017, which indicate that sustainability measures are achievable in China. China's processing industry has also expressed willingness to reject soybeans from Brazilian government blacklisted farms. So what else could be done? Let's look at the problems. Next slide, please. As we found earlier, food policy hasn't incorporated the factor of environmental production, especially overseas environmental production, into consideration. A key problem is that there is a bureaucratic challenge in China, as quite a few government agencies govern agricultural commodities, but all of them has declined a jurisdiction over food imports with their linkage with overseas environmental problems. And for example, those government agencies listed here have roles in overseeing certain aspects of the importation of soybeans. So one of them could also play a role in governing the embodied overseas habitat conversion. But with such a diversified bureaucratic structure overseeing the industry, we need to influence multiple departments simultaneously in order for the government to establish principles with differentiation-free features. And finally, for those three provinces which have high import value, could have made some innovative provincial level or local level policy and initiatives. Next slide, please. So that is for my today's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. That was a very, very interesting, concise, but very interesting presentation, very comprehensive in the information shared. I think it's fascinating to see how indeed, on the one hand, trade policy has had such an influence on the different importing rates, and how on the other hand, there's these deep challenges like what is sometimes called the need for a whole government approach, in which the different agencies are indeed able to collaborate and work towards the same policy aims. There was one question from Kamal Rai from Nepal. I hope you can read it. Demand of soya is in incline in China. The GMO soya, genetic modified soya, is going on. Is there any policy on GMO soya? Could have adverse impacts to health, ecosystem, and environment. How and what approach for the best solution?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question on GM food. And based on my knowledge, I know that Chinese consumers were more keen to have imports from Russia and Canada because they provide GM-free food, and so that is that's part of the China's diversification strategy, because by going more soy in Russia, we can have more GM-free food. So I think the overall atmosphere in China is not that positive or friendly to GM food. And that's what I want to say about the GM soy.
Yeah, I was wondering, I had a little follow-up question to that, because I wondered indeed how much discussion there has been amongst the public in China about the links with, for example, the forest fires in Brazil, and how much awareness there is in general between the links, on the one hand, between pork consumption and issues like genetically modified soy and deforestation.
I think the opinions, the public opinions in China is quite divided. For those poor environmental friendly people and consumers, I think they care about the fire in the Amazon. But when the social media writes something that complaining about the meat consumption or soy consumption in China, then there are some consumers starting to think that try to get rid of this kind of complaint. So I would say the opinions toward that is quite divided. We care about the environmental factors, but when this is linked to the Chinese people's consumption patterns, then people turn to say no to this link. So I think we need more NGOs and think tanks to provide public education papers about the linkage between what we eat today and what overseas environment problems could be.
Okay, thank you very, very much. If there's further questions, there might be one. Andrea Latin had a question, how useful there is the sustainability policy of COFCO? How useful is its sustainability policy?
The COFCO headquarters in Beijing, we have quite good relationship with this headquarters. And based on our conversation, we know that it is about at the very beginning of establishing the sustainability policy. And because of its power and because of its influence, I would say it is very useful in terms of affecting its branches around the world, and also create a level playing field for the whole industry in China. So I think once the sustainability policy is established by COFCO, it's going to be its impact is going to be very outstanding. That's what I think. And also the NGOs like us would kind of help it to promote its policy, its new sustainability framework.
Okay, thank you very, very much. If more people have questions, please don't hesitate to type them in the Q&A box. In the meantime, I propose we go over to the next speakers, who are Bola Batarai and Roshan Chikambanyar from NAFAN, the National Forum for Advocacy in Nepal. Please, you have the floor. I don't know if you want to share.
Thank you, Sima. Yes, we'll upload our slides. So, Roshan, are you ready to upload? Then you can go ahead. Good morning, all. We, Roshan and me, are going to present our very short presentation about how Nepal government incentivizing animal agriculture in Nepal. In this presentation, as you know, that Nepal is not an export country. We are importing meat and other products from other countries. But after having new constitution of Nepal, our 3 layers of government like federal, provincial, and local government are formulating a lot of policies as per their rights, and within those, the rights, they are implementing through different policies and program. There are a lot of incentive. There are a lot of program they are developing to incentivizing animal agriculture in Nepal. So in this presentation, we are going to share how and what kind of program Nepal government has been implementing to promote this unsustainable animal agriculture in Nepal. So I would like to request Roshanji to go through this presentation, and if there will be a question, then we can respond accordingly. So over to you, Roshan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Bola, sir. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for giving us opportunity to share our presentation on the government incentivizing animal agriculture in Nepal. So I'd like to proceed. So to start with the introduction, I'd like to give some context of Nepal regarding animal farming. Buffalo meat is one of the most demanded item in Nepal, which is followed by goat, chicken, pig, dog, and dog. The cow's meat, that means beef, is not consumed in Nepal because people worship cow, and they regard cow as the god. Government of Nepal is promoting animal agriculture by providing different types of the subsidies to the farmers. Government of Nepal has provision to give subsidies, especially in the case of insurance of livestock. The Insurance Board of Nepal about 7 years ago released crop and livestock insurance directives to cover the risks of those livestock farming. And as per the directive, the producer or the farmers receive about 75% of subsidies from the government side. So what's the problem? Major problems in Nepal. The main problem is the superstitious beliefs of the people. People believe that God will be pleased when they sacrifice the animals, especially the male one. And in the name of the festivals, every year thousands of animals are sacrificed. The photo that is presented on the right hand side is also one of the festival of Nepal, in which thousands of buffaloes, goats, and pigeons are killed brutally in the name of the festivals, in the name of God. Similarly, people have lack of knowledge about animal rights. They do not care about animal rights, and they also do not have knowledge about the effect of meat consumption on their health. People are destroying the forest randomly for fodder and to make pasture land. People also do not have sufficient knowledge about detrimental effects of mass scale animal farming, especially the people of forest user groups. They are unknown about these impacts. And another problem is that subsidies distribution is not transparent. It is distributed, there is unequal distribution of the subsidies. Government of Nepal distributes such subsidies without any concrete vision. So there are 3 layers of government, as Bhola sir already told before. And there is also lack of harmonization among different policies in Nepal regarding the animal agriculture. So these are some policies and acts which which is related to the animal agriculture, and in fact they promote the animal agriculture. These policies says that the animal agriculture should be increased, most of these policies, and but there are only few policies and directives that favors the animal rights. So Aquatic Animal Protection Act 1960, Animal Welfare Protection Act Nepal, and Animal Welfare Directives 2016 are just few. We have only a few few policies regarding the right of the animals. So as I have already mentioned, animals are killed brutally in different festivals. So Now I'm going to talk about the government investment in animal farming, the main important topic of this presentation. Uh, all the things that is carrying on in the name of animal agriculture is being conducted by Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development. So this is the government body that looks after all those policies. So according to Upadhyay 2017, livestock population has increased from 0.73% to 1.23% per annum during the last 2 decades, that is from 1995 to 2015. And one important thing is that livestock farming contributes to about 11.5% of country's total GDP. And it is very interesting fact in case of Nepal, and a quarter of people of Nepal are involved directly or indirectly in agricultural practices. Their livelihood is based on the animal farming, and mass scale animal agriculture is increasing day by day in Nepal. uh, Similarly, private sectors also invest a huge amount in animal agriculture, from not only government. Different projects of Nepal government of Nepal is also investing in animal farming. So to give an example, one of the program of government, that is leasehold forestry and livestock development program, which supports the local people uh, to farm the goat, to do the goat farming, to increase their livelihood. To So next important fact is that in 2014, only 593 million sum was insured in the name in agriculture, animal agriculture, and that means livestock agriculture, and that has increased to 7.8 billion. So which is insured sum, which is almost 12 times in this 3 to 4 years. So here I would like to present one figure of the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development. It also clearly shows that in 2013-14, there was less than 2 billion rupees insured amount for livestock insurance, but it drastically uh, increased to about 14 billion Nepali rupees in 2018-19. So which is almost the seven times higher. If you look at this another figure, the subsidies provided by the government is almost about uh, the same amount as people have invested in for insurance. And I'd like to add one more thing here. The subsidized premium is especially obtained by the rich farmers, rich people, rather than the poor and marginalized people. The people who have money and powers only get the subsidized amount, and poor people rarely get such amount. So which is unequal inequality to the people. And there are 753 local government in Nepal, in all over Nepal, and they also allocate in some way some amount for some budget for the livelihood development. And I would like to give one example here. The budget allocated by Jitpur Simara sub-metropolitan city of Bara district of Nepal. So if you look at the table table here, the local government has given more priority for livestock development than the forest and environment conservation. So what are the consequences of all these things? So the main thing is the elite people in the nexus to government are accessing all the public resources as well as all the benefits provided by the government. Rich farmers are getting more benefits from the subsidies rather than the poor one, and all those activities are causing different environmental problems like deforestation, pollution, and biodiversity loss. It is especially impact uh, impacting the forest communities. There is inequality among distribution of subsidies. There is inequality in ecosystem services to the local. There arises conflicts, as well as it is an example of the bad governance of the local government. And many diseases are also being spread due to the consumption of meat. So what's next? To conclude, government should minimize providing subsidies to discourage the animal farming, because it is very bad for, it is very it has many impacts in the environment. And governments should ensure the equity in subsidy distribution. Not only the rich one, poor one also should get such subsidies. And we have to organize different campaigns in behavior change at different levels. For example, national level, or regional level, or district level as well. We should promote plant-based products. For example, we can organize vegetable food farm, food fest, and art bazaar. Art bazaar is one of the market strategy. Not strategy. Art bazaar is one of the marketing in which people exchange or sell their things in cheaper rate. And the communities need strong resistance to the government subsidies, that government is providing unequal subsidies. There is inequality and untransparent distribution of subsidies. So such people should fight against such inequality. And we should support in formulating policies regarding the production and consumption of meat and animal right. We have to protect the rights of the animal, and there should be ensured in policies of the local government. We can act through that. And we have to conduct different researches and public policy processes to reduce the consumption of the meat and production of the meat in different levels. And for now, this is much for my presentation. Thank you for all of you for your patience. And if you have any further queries, we can discuss more. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very, very much, Roshan and Bola. I think that's a very interesting presentation, and it so clearly also shows how there's this link between, on the one hand, government being influenced by rich elites, and on the other hand, the government then subsidizing those very elites. So all kinds of different ways, including indeed insurance policies. And of course, that's a very recognizable pattern for example, other continents. For example, in Europe, sadly, they've just adopted, the Parliament and the Council have just adopted a so-called reformed common agriculture policy that will continue to primarily spend a lot of subsidies on very large and rich farmers in Europe. And there's been some very interesting research that shows that this is very much due to the lobby of that agro-industrial sector itself, including some very big and powerful companies in Europe. We'll talk more about that next week also, when there will be a webinar with a stronger focus on European livestock farming. And of course, the participants in this webinar are very much welcome to join that webinar as well. We received a couple of questions through the email, which are, I think, more general for all the panelists, but it would be great if you could particularly look at these as well. First of all, how has industrial livestock impacted indigenous species and common land grazing? And then whether there are any gender implications and impacts of the industrial livestock practices that you know of. And what is the role of women in both traditional livestock production, and to what extent is that being impacted also by the expansion of more industrial forms of an intensive form of livestock production? And the third question was, what is the impact of industrial livestock on common lands and nomadic community rights? To what extent is that an issue in Nepal as well? Feel free to respond to the question you're most comfortable with.
Yeah, no, actually, it is very good question, like how indigenous species in common land are affected by the industrial livestock. Uh, I can give few examples, like the indigenous communities who are conserving and managing their resources, like different species based on their cultural and social and economic values. But when the government provide incentive to the industrial livestock companies, uh, then the livestock companies are promoting like monocultural fodder to their animals. Like they are selecting few species. They destroyed the traditional species, that other species which is valued to indigenous communities, but they are promoting few particular species to feed their animals, so that the indigenous space, the value of indigenous species are being destroyed. There are a number of cases that we can observe in the Nepalese societies. About the gender implication, that most of the cases when we had a traditional system to have livelihood practices, uh, the people were keeping different animals, they were managing their resources, like different forest species to feed their livestock. But when they expand this industrial livestock, they just choose few animals, few species, and they encroached all the public land, the common land, and they started to plant few species, so that the traditional species, traditional practices are being negatively impacted. That means that the role of women in agriculture system is also converted into the different ways, like they are not allowed to engage in this process. My few of my colleagues are also by engaging in this process, but there is no woman at all. They like they brought the land nearby the community people, and they have started to plant new species, and they are appointing the male workers rather than female, so that the women who were working into to engage in this process, they are not getting job. That means they are also losing their jobs. That is also we can observe from new industrial livestock practices in Nepal. And regarding common land, as I mentioned, that the indigenous land are that are encroached by the industrial people, like the people who have money, they just encroach or they buy that land, and that is negatively impacted to the nomadic community rights in the land system as well. So that kind of things that we can this is new approach in Nepal. It was not practiced since long time, but based on the new the so-called development, like Roshan highlighted about the policies, three level of government's policy, that they are just adopting new policy from other part of the world, and they are trying to impose in our traditional system. And because of that, we are going to lose our whole essence of the practices, like our traditional practices, the value system over our land and natural resources, which is going to going to have a negative impact in the days to come. So it is very serious matter to Nepalese communities to become aware and to start some sort of resistance. Otherwise we will lose our whole value system in the days to come. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this probably also responds. There was indeed a question on the chat, which you probably already saw. I think you already actually responded to that from Kamal Rai, who's one of our from one of our indigenous member groups in Nepal, who pointed out actually more as a command also that traditional knowledge and animal husbandry is very much related to indigenous peoples and cultural values in society, and that intensive farming policy and politics are leading to land and resources grabs amongst indigenous peoples in Nepal. So I think that command actually very, very much links up to what you just explained indeed. If there's no further questions, thank you very much. Then I would like to go on to the next speaker, to Daniel from ETC Group, who has done a lot of research, particularly also on corporate capture of policies. Nat, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I don't think I will have slides because I am using my phone to connect to the call due to very weak internet here at home and using my phone data. So I hope this gets clear all throughout. There was actually requested to make a short presentation on corporate consolidation and digitalization in the industrial livestock industry. So I will just provide some snapshot of what is behind the industry in terms of corporate interest, and also some trends related to the adoption and deployment of digital agriculture in that sector. So, like, if we will look at the corporate ownership of livestock genetics, of course, where the seeds, no, the breeds are coming from, and we all know, mentioned by our friends from Nepal, and also earlier in the presentation from China, that of course a lot of this the industry relies on uniform breeds, no, to be able to come up with to meet market demands, and also come up with products that conform to the industrial system of that requires uniformity. Like, if we look at the profile, there are only 3 companies that control virtually all of the world's poultry breeding. Also, 3 companies control almost half, 47% of the commercial swine genetic market. Like, you have probably, those of us who have gone into research on livestock sector would have stumbled on names like Tyson Foods, Cobb Vantress in the US, which is the top biggest producer of genetics for chicken, cows, and pigs. Also, this Hong Kong-based Chinese company, WH Group, that actually took over Smithfield's Foods a few years ago, I think in 2017. They also primarily produce genetics for swine genetics for pigs. And from this part of the world, again, Hong Kong, you have Thailand. Those of us in Southeast Asia are very familiar with Charoen Pokapan, or CP. That company is also among those that control the production of livestock breeds for pigs, for broiler chicken, also for layers, duck, shrimp, fish. Now, those sources of protein. So CP has actually become very huge in this part of the world and globally, with acquisition and also expansion of its interest globally. We have other names that we have probably stumbled with, like EW Group or Aviagen. Also, Hendrix in the Netherlands, and Group Grimaud in France. So those are the key players. When it comes to livestock breeding, more and more these producers of livestock breeds across species are actually adopting gene editing technologies. Recently, in particular, CRISPR-Cas9, and the world has actually become familiar with CRISPR-Cas9 because of the recent award given by the Nobel Prize for Chemistry to the 2 ladies that developed or discovered the technique 7 years ago. So CRISPR-Cas9 is actually, well, they always call it cheap, precise, but those are claims of proponents, of course. These are primarily gene editing technologies that actually make um, engineering of the genetic makeup of breeds faster, and not just faster, but it also goes around biosafety regulations, because most biosafety regulations, except in the EU, because of a ruling from the court, do not actually cover gene editing techniques in their biosafety laws or regulations that are primarily developed for the conventional genetic engineering, splicing, and gene transfer techniques. So this is a raging controversy at the Convention on Biodiversity, as Simon and those of us who have been following the CBD knows. And this is now a go-to technique for developers and producers of livestock breeds, because it introduces changes and also improvements as required by the industry in a faster, cheaper way from a market efficiency perspective. Also, companies like Genus has actually started to openly announce that they are devoting their research and development budget largely to develop new breeds using CRISPR-Cas9. Again, circling around the biosafety regulations in most countries, in particular the US. And of course Asia, where CRISPR-Cas9 is being used, but nobody is looking, largely below the radar. And many of these gene edited, particularly pigs, are actually targeted to the Chinese market, which is the world's biggest market for pork. We also need to look into the corporate interest in animal pharma, because it's actually pharma interest that makes the industry alive. Like all these pharmaceuticals, largely antibiotics, that are bombarding the livestock industry, in the industrial livestock industry, because that's the only way for these poor animals to survive in those kinds of inhuman ways of raising animals. So the top 3 of the companies in global animal pharmaceutical actually control 46% of the market. The top 4 controls 58% of that global animal pharma market. Some of these names are actually very familiar among us who have been studying the livestock industry, like Zoetis in the US, Elanco, which is actually now fused with Bayer Animal Health. These were actually based in the US. Bayer, of course, is based in Germany and bought up Elanco. And you have, of course, that well-known, not popular, but the opposite, Boehringer Ingelheim, for example, based in Germany, and Merck in the USA, of course, are among the top 4 pharmaceutical companies that lead the sector in 2018. And many of these companies, animal pharmaceutical companies, are actually relying on big data and also molecular engineering to come up with new products to address the needs of the industry that are largely facing a crisis on antimicrobial resistance, antibiotic resistance. So this is not just among humans, but also among animals, and also the spread of zoonotic diseases, infectious diseases from animals, and among which, of course, is COVID-19. So these pharmaceutical giants that are focusing on animal needs are actually among the biggest, but usually below the radar again. Also, if you look at corporate interest in the livestock industry, we should not miss, of course, what's happening in the agricultural commodity trading, because much of the feeds, soya, corn, that go into the livestock industry, the industrial production of livestock are actually traded globally. I think some of those trade, no, interesting data were actually presented by our speaker from China earlier on. And we all know that this industry, like almost virtually all of it, is actually in the hands of the six companies. Cargill, Copco, of course, Copco is a newbie in the sense that it wasn't there 20 years ago. We have Archer, Daniel Midlands, ADM, Bunge in the USA, and Wilmar International, which is based in Singapore, and Louis Dreyfus in the Netherlands. They virtually control all of the sector and all of the infrastructures in the sector, including silos, ports, and more recently, there's been huge alliances among these six to share data, to develop their big data analytics by sharing and collaborating on partnerships on data that allow them to understand better the market, in the sense that they could take advantage of profit possibilities. So it's mainly for profit interest, of course, this collaboration among these six commodity traders. So just to, I'm about to wrap up, but just to plug up that I think when we're talking about Asia and looking at the livestock industry, a very, very important area that we need to really zoom in, which may not be relevant for some parts of the region, like South Asia, as mentioned by our friends from Nepal and others. Of course, it's the pork market. Because it's interesting that pork is the most consumed protein source worldwide, and China alone is the world's largest pork producer with nearly 50% of the world's total production, and of the top 10 consumers per capita of pork globally in 2018, 4 or 5 are actually from this region, from Southeast Asia and East Asia alone. China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam, and not too far is the Philippines in top 15, I think. So this is a pork-eating region, and a lot of it is actually still produced in backyard, but increasingly in industrial settings. And we all know the explosive formula behind this industrial control and industrialization of meat production. And in this part of the world, we've seen the most serious symptoms of industrial production of pork, like ASF, the African swine flu, that actually beleaguered this region a year ago, up to 2 years ago, are still hounding us, and then COVID-19 took over. So there's this eternal crisis of food, in particular in relation to meat production. And while this is defined by us or in our narrative as crisis, there are actually some interests that see this as opportunity. We find this very, very interesting because among the corporate interests that look at this crisis in pork, in piggeries in Asia as potential, are actually big tech. Big tech like Alibaba, Baidu, NetEase, Tencent, all of them actually have growing interest on pork, on pork piggery or the pork sector in different shades. Most interesting for us, of course, are the direct investments of companies like NetEase, which is a gaming company, an online gambling company that actually invested in raising pigs in the past 6 years, since 2014, really investing on piggeries that are high tech. They actually even sell in their online platform, which has actually merged with Alibaba last year, these happy pigs that are produced in a happy environment with music and very nice rooms that are monitored 24 hours. And this is part of the pork miracle that are being projected out from China now, thanks to digital technologies. So all of these claims about the value of digital technologies in raising happy, clean, and sanitary pigs to cater to the growing market for pork in the region are actually coming out in the media. Even The Guardian features this. You have all sorts of technologies applied in pig racing, such as Internet of Pigs, inspired by the Internet of Cows in Brazil, which has been growing since 2015, just to mention that. They also have the application of facial recognition of pigs, where individual pigs are actually tagged and recognized by artificial intelligence and machine learning to allow the industrial racer to be able to monitor the health and also the history of pigs and inform consumers. So all this bastardization of the definition of informed consumer information and consumer consent, sanitation, hygiene, all of this are quite sickening. Hearing and following this in the entry of big tech in big swine or big pork. And as I mentioned, crises like the ASF, African swine flu, and now COVID-19 pandemic are actually looked at as potentials for profit making by entirely new players that have nothing to do with food and agriculture, that have become food producers now, no? Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, as I mentioned, and NetEase. And it's actually not just the Chinese. There are much more coming from GAFAM, like Google, Facebook, and all that, and of course Amazon are all investing in the food system currently, more recently. So just to raise these trends that might interest our friends working in the livestock sector. So I end my presentation there. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. That was very interesting. I think it's indeed very cynical to see how a massive crisis like the Asian swine flu, in which, you know, thousands of pigs, I've understood, were even buried alive because there was no capacity to, as they call, kill them anymore in countries, and with devastating impact also of a lot of small scale producers, and that it's at the same time seen as a major business opportunity. Actually, in my original home country in the Netherlands, the pig farmers have been very much profiting also from the situation in China and other Asian countries by massively increasing their exports. Despite a policy of the Dutch government that is now trying to reduce the overall numbers of pigs in the Netherlands because of the devastating impacts of nitrogen deposition, particularly on nature, and they've actually realized that they are massively violating the European nature guidelines, Natura 2000. So just legally, because of EU law, they will have to reduce, amongst others, pork facilities, pig facilities. But they've not been able to do that. I mean, they're trying to lure the farmers with the incentives, but the commercial opportunities at this moment in Asia are just a lot bigger. So instead of that, it's very hard to decrease at this moment the sector in European countries. And that has very devastating impact on biodiversity and the environment in general in Europe as well. And of course, this is then fed by Brazilian soy. So you really see that this is really a global chain of agro-industry that is circling around. And because of the nature of livestock, it's often so much more concentrated than even other agro-industrial sectors. I wondered if there were any other questions here. I haven't seen one in the chat. If people still have questions later on, also you can put them either in the chat or in the question and answer box. Please don't hesitate to type them in. During the last presentation, we'll still have some extra minutes for discussion all the way at the end of the different presentations. But I think the different stories are also very, very complementary. So I'm very happy to now give over the floor to Afsar Jaffrey from Grain in India. who has been working, and GRAIN, of course, is an organization that has been working very intensely on this issue and on the impacts of agro-industry in general for many, many years. So we're very happy to have him amongst us as well. Dr. Apsar, you have the floor. You're still muted. I don't know. Wait. I'm afraid you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah, there you are.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, I'm very thankful to GFC for this opportunity and to speak to this audience on this issue. As you said, I'm Afsar Jaffrey. I'm from GRAIN. It's almost, I'm completing 2 years in GRAIN, and which is a small international organization which works to support small farmers and social movements. In fact, for the topic is basically finance incentives for agro-industrial livestock, and I will try to also focus on milk production and the context of milk production and FTAs. In fact, Asia and a few countries in Asia, for example, like China and India, we have seen a substantial growth in agro-industrial livestock, not only in the meat production, but also in the dairy sector in recent years. And this is happening despite the fact that there is a drastic consequences of increasing meat and dairy production and consumption for our environment because of the huge greenhouse gas emissions, as well as destruction of valuable forest ecosystems and community lands. And we have seen this happening in South America, as well as in Asia, in Indonesia. And currently, we have seen that the livestock sector emits around an estimated of 7.1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year. And according to Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return Study of 2017, meat production in particularly pork has increased dramatically across the 15 major Asia Pacific market. And the total meat production increased 13-fold between 1961 and 2013, and a compound annual growth rate of 3% in the 10 years to 2013. And as per the OECD projections, demand in this sector is forecast to grow by 19% to 144 million tons by 2025. There is also a Robobank and PwC study of November 2019, which talks about the meat consumption in Asia, which continues to grow and is expected to reach around 176 million metric tons by 2030. And this prospect will automatically raise animal feed demand, impacting the global supply chain for feed grains and oilseeds. There's another trend which we are also noticing in this sector, and lots of investment are coming in that sector as well, is the increasing automation of livestock farm, which is a major factor driving precision livestock farming, which is basically climate control, water usage, feed dosage, weight estimates, animal behavior, including the use of camera, milk robots, sensor, and microphones. And in fact, Den has done a lot of work on that. Now, so far as the livestock sector is concerned, the major investor we have seen, the major funds comes from the World Bank. I mean, currently World Bank, spends around 104 billion in the active investment in livestock sector. And the same, the World Bank is also investing heavily in the South Asia region in the livestock sector. For example, we have seen, World Bank has invested around 500 million in Bangladesh in 2018 to improve livestock and dairy production and to promote climate resilient and emission saving practices. This is a new thing which the World Bank is, investing in. And I think this is basically to show that the factory farming and livestock farming is not, impacting the climate. So they have, like the climate smart agriculture, they have come out with a new term called climate resilient resilient and emission-saving practices in livestock. And they have in fact also invested, the World Bank is also investing in livestock in the Vietnam, in the good animal husbandry practice. In Central Asia, we have seen World Bank investing around 500 million in Kazakhstan in the Sustainable Livestock Development Program. Now, not only World Bank, but we have also seen the World Bank investment arm, which is IFC, investing in livestock sector. And in India, in fact, they have invested, the IFC have invested in a lot of private, firms. For example, Suguna, which is one of the leading, in India's leading chicken supplier. They have, and it's world top 10 biggest poultry producer. They have invested about 44 million in Suguna, and they have also invested in another poultry firm which is called Srinivasa, around 18.75 million US dollar in 2019. Not only in the livestock sector, but IFC is also investing a lot in the dairy sector. And they have invested in Bangladesh. They have invested in the companies in, for example, in Bangladesh, they invested in Pran Group, and they are keep on investing in that. And they are also invested in some of the Indian companies. Now, so far as the dairy sector is concerned, we have seen huge investment coming in dairy sector in the South Asia region, especially in India and in Pakistan. And when this investor invest in the dairy sector, probably they forget about that in this region, especially in South Asia, the dairy is dominated by small scale farmers. They are the ones who are really, providing milk to such a huge population in India and in other parts of South Asia. And when this investment is coming into the small private companies who are into the dairy sector, they in fact impact a lot these small scale farmers, especially the women farmers, because the women farmers, especially in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, are hugely into the dairy sector. Now, if you look at, and another interesting fact is that this is the region which has got several indigenous breeds of livestock. For example, in India, we have around 43 indigenous breeds of livestock, and we have 13 buffalo breeds of livestock. But most of these investments are coming into the exotic germplasm, they are coming into the foreign breeds, which are not, suitable for this kind of atmosphere, but they are being given all kinds of facility. So that is another interesting thing so far as the investment in the dairy sector is concerned. Now, if you look at the overall investment in the dairy sector, there is a report by CRISIL, which is a credit rating agency in India of 2018, which predicts the dairy sector in India is likely to see around 130 to 140 billion Indian rupee of investment in the next 3 years. And if you look at the last 10 years, there's a huge investment which has come in the dairy sector in India. For example, there's the largest private equity firm of USA, which is called Cryle Group, has invested around 22 million in the Indian company called Trumula Milk Product. And then in 2014, in May 2010, they invest, and in 2014, they sell that share to a European company, Lactalis. And this is the trend we have seen. The foreign investor, they first invest in the dairy companies, Indian dairy companies, and then they sell off their share to a foreign dairy company from the developed countries. Similarly, we have also seen the Cargill venture invested around $20 million in Dolda Dairy. The IDFC private equity fund, Fund 3, have invested around 150 million Indian rupees in Parag Dairy. Then we have IFC, which is have invested around $15 million in Parag as well. And then there is our Avishkar India 2 Company Limited, which has invested around 1.17 million in the Milk Mantra Dairy. So there's several such. Robobank has invested around $12 million, as well as French Development Finance Institution. Proparco invested around 9 million in Prabhat Dairy. And so then there are investment in Dolda Dairy. So there is a lot of investment which has come in the dairy sector in India. And but when these investments come in, and we have also seen that in India as well as other countries in South Asia are also being pushed, and there are pressure on this country to sign FTAs. And the FTAs are being signed especially by European Union, USA, and then there is a large group called RCEP, which has got 16 countries, including India, but India came out of that. And one of the main demand from the members of the RCEP, or for example, European Union or USA, is to allow import of dairy products in the Indian market. And that was a big push. And it was not only the dairy product, but also they want a share in the feed industry. They want to send the GM, especially the US, GM soya and GM corn to capture the feed market in India, because India already has a huge dairy industry. We have several cooperatives. Almost every province in India has got a cooperative, and they're doing excellently well. And we don't import that much of the dairy product. But still, because of the huge market, these multinational companies are very much looking at Indian market to capture it and to push their dairy products into Indian market. And one interesting case which has also came in, which we have also worked on, is the case where there's a private equity firm called Omnivore, which has invested into a Doodhwala, which is basically an app-based milk supplier. And they invested around $100 million in that Doodhwala. And then after a few years, or 4 or 5 years, that whole Doodhwala thing collapsed. And then this Omnivore just exited and took all the money, because that Doodhwala thing was sold to another Indian firm. But the Omnivore did not lose any money. But a lot of vendors of Doodhwala who were supplying, and these are all small marginal farmers, but supplying to Doodhwala, as well as some small companies, they lost a lot of money. And we have in fact put that private equity report, which we have brought out, the Grain has brought out recently. So I'm trying to say that despite all this investment, the local farmers are not getting anything out of it. It is basically the big corporate firms who are gaining out of this investment in India in the dairy sector. And one interesting thing is also we have seen when we did a paper on Indo-US, because in US is trying, when Mr. Trump visited India in February this year, they announced that they are going to sign an FTA. And then they want around $6 billion of market in India, especially in agriculture sector. And most of it they are demanding into especially the import of soya, as well as corn and other GM products, which US grows a lot, especially sugar and wheat and all that. But in India, a lot of farmers, there are a large number of farmers who grow soya, who grow corn, and it's not GM soya or GM corn. It's a hybrid soya and there's already a big market of Indian soya, Indian corn in the US, because there are dairy farms in US, organic farms who want non-GM soya, non-GM. But those farmers are not gaining anything. And once we have this kind of import there, these farmers will anyway get devastated. Even today, they're not getting a good price. You might have read about huge protests going on in India, all over India, because of India has passed 3 legislation recently regarding market, regarding hoarding and contract farming. And those farmers who are growing corn, they're getting half the market price, because there's already so much of imports coming in. So, the FTAs is going to have a serious impact, not only in the dairy sector, but I think they will also try to give a push to the agro-industrial livestock farming in India, which will have devastating impact on the small and marginal farmers. This is, I would like to conclude here. And I would also like to request, if possible, I mean, we should also look at how the forest, I mean, how it's going to impact the forest. I think there is no such study have been done so far in the Indian context to look at how this livestock industry, the expansion of the livestock industry is, as we have seen in Indonesia, is impacting the forest in India. Because we have seen in last 4 or 5 years, a large number of license has been issued, and a lot of for the forest exploitation of forest. So we also need to do some study to look at if there is a connection between the livestock industry expansion as well as the forest destruction in India. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That was a very interesting presentation. I think it also very much connected well with the other presentations we've heard before. I'm fascinated by your point about the connection with forest. I was deeply impressed when I visited India last time to actually see the system of cattle roaming around in the forest, and then being able to return home by itself. This was in West Bengal. And yeah, I know from some ecological studies that a certain level of indeed free roaming cattle ranching in forest can be actually very positive. In fact, some of our friends in Iran, for example, who sadly couldn't join this meeting because of the time difference, but yeah, they've been trying to really make the point also to their governments that having a small amount of traditional livestock herding in forests can actually be very positive for forest ecology. And of course, the shift from those kinds of systems towards these very industrial system is very negative. As I said, not only just because of the expansion of live feedstock production and the deforestation that is caused by that in, for example, South America, but also very much because of the nitrogen deposition and other pollution impacts of intensive livestock farming, which are quite devastating in a lot of regions in the world. I don't know if, for example, Dr. Tian wants to comment on that a little bit more. There's also one question from Kamarai. Is there any initiative to unify the small and marginal farming in India?
Yeah, in fact, there is no initiative as such to unify, but there is groups who are working across South Asia. For example, Via Campus in South Asia is doing excellently good work to unify or to, at least bring together the farmers, small-scale farmers from Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And there are lots of discussion happening on across all these sectors, whether it's FTA or it's livestock or it's, agroecology, food sovereignty. So there's already a very good initiative happening, and it's already being, and a lot of groups across South Asia, farmers groups are involved in that process.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I am aware that we've already had some discussions in the beginning. If there's no big questions, please feel free to further type in also in the chat. I would just like to point out that, we would very much like to continue this discussion. I'll quickly type our website of the Global Forest Coalition. Actually, some of the story you just told reminded me also on a case study that is available on that website as part of our What's at Stake report we actually produced a couple of years ago. A colleague who is now with La Via Campesina in India, Ashlesha Katse, was the one who elaborated that case at that time, and that was also very strongly focused on the negative impacts of this concentration of the dairy industry in corporate hands on the traditional cooperatives, dairy cooperatives that still exist throughout India and that are actually very essential for providing people's livelihoods, once again, particularly for women who play quite a key role in the whole traditional livestock industry, but also for peasants in general, and especially also for nutritional purposes. And yeah, I think this webinar has very clearly shown this very worrying trend in Asia, where actually a region that traditionally has very low, in most countries, very low levels of consumption of meat, very modest, very healthy diets, is now being lured by big corporations into industrial large-scale production system that is not only having very devastating impacts on the environment, but also very much on the social side, on small producers, on women, on peasants, on indigenous peoples and pastoralists, and of course on the animals themselves, who really see their welfare seriously impacted in a lot of the systems that are being promoted. So I would like to thank all the, having reached the end of our webinar, I would very much like to thank all the panelists for their presentations. We very much hope we can use all the information that has been presented here, and once again, it has been recorded, that we can use it also for future purposes. We might follow up actually to some of you for asking for more written information, also on some of the things that have been presented. We are actually planning to publish a report in December on the links between perverse incentives, as you call them, perverse subsidies for activities that impact negatively on forests and other ecosystems, and corporate capture, and how the fact that a lot of policy making, including even in an environmental field, has been taken over and by corporations de facto, is heavily influenced by corporations, is creating massive obstacles to actually get rid of some of these subsidies and other incentives that have been described here by the different panelists for activities that are actually very, very negative. And it's cynical to see that there's been this persistent call for more climate finance and more finance for biodiversity conservation, but that actually a multitude of funding is still being pumped into sectors that are very, very negative from both a biodiversity and a climate point of view, if not to talk about human health, animal health, and social aspects. So thank you very, very much. I don't know if any of the panelists would still like to have a final word, maybe also reacting to some of the other presentations. Would one of you still, because of course you're also very free to ask questions to each other or to comment on each other's presentations. If not, then yeah, I would just like to very much thank all of you for all your very, very interesting inputs. I also want to thank particularly Milena and Isis for organizing this series of webinars, and all the practical background, and some of the comms team in GFC, which is at this moment in the middle of the night, so not attending, but they've done some of the background work as well. And we very much hope to stay in contact with all of you, also with the other attendees. Please do feel free to check into our website and to subscribe to our newsletter, because we would very much like to continue the conversation with all of you to connect about the different aspects of this massive and rapidly expanding livestock industry. So thank you very much. Good night to those who are in my part of the planet, and have a good day to all of you there in Asia. And I very much hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks a lot.